In the summer of 1944, deep inside a German testing ground near Kummersdorf, a group of Wehrmacht engineers gathered around something strange, something foreign. It was covered in dust, still smelling faintly of burned oil and cordite. A captured American Sherman tank. At first, they laughed. The German engineers, proud men who had designed the mighty Tiger and Panther, saw the Sherman as nothing more than a toy, too light, too simple, too American. One of them, a young officer named Ernst Kruger, even joked, "It looks like a tractor painted for war." But over the following weeks, that joke would vanish. They started the tests. The order was to study the Sherman, understand its weaknesses, and find ways to destroy it more efficiently. It had been captured during the fighting near Normandy, almost intact. Its crew had been killed, its engine only slightly damaged. At first, the German mechanics struggled to even start it. The manual, written in English, made little sense to them. But then, with a few tries, the engine coughed to life. The old Continental radio roared, and for the first time, the engineers looked at each other in surprise. It ran smoothly. Too smoothly. Kruger wrote in his diary, "We expected it to rattle, to fall apart under its own weight. Instead, it feels alive. Not precise like our Tigers, but forgiving. It runs even when mistreated." They drove the Sherman across the testing grounds, through mud, through rain, through rough terrain that even their German trucks avoided. Day after day, the same result. It kept going. The suspension held. The transmission, simple and sturdy, never jammed. After a week, Kruger began comparing it to the Panther, Germany's pride. The Panther was a masterpiece, powerful, sleek, and deadly. But it needed constant attention, repairs, tuning, spare parts. The Sherman, it just worked. One of the mechanics, old Otto, was overheard saying quietly, "This thing was built by people who wanted their sons to come home alive." By September, something had changed in the lab. The engineers who once mocked the American machine were now treating it with a strange respect. They began calling it der freundliche Panzer, the friendly tank. They noticed things. The way the Sherman's interior was designed for the crew's comfort, the logical layout of controls, the extra fire extinguishers, the escape hatches. It was built not just to kill, but to save lives. Kruger wrote again, "Our Tigers are kings, but they demand sacrifices. The Sherman feels like it was made by men who value human life. I cannot explain why, but when I sit inside it, I feel safe." As the war turned against Germany, supplies dwindled and morale sank. The engineers received orders to destroy the Sherman before the Soviets reached the facility. But Kruger couldn't bring himself to do it. He ordered his men to drain the fuel, hide the tank under camouflage nets, and record their data. The final entry in Kruger's diary, dated April 1945, simply reads, "The Americans built this tank for endurance, not glory. Perhaps that is why they will win." When Allied forces entered Kummersdorf weeks later, they found the Sherman, dusty, hidden, untouched. A single note taped to the turret read in German, "She runs better than anything we ever built." Today, that Sherman sits in a museum in Bavaria. The original test reports were found decades later, confirming what Kruger and his men had discovered. The Sherman wasn't the strongest or the most advanced, but it was the most reliable. A machine built not for perfection, but for survival.
Months after the war ended, Allied intelligence teams began combing through the wreckage of Germany's war machine. Deep inside a half-collapsed building at Kummersdorf, they uncovered a collection of crates sealed with wax and stamped Geheim, top secret. Inside were the forgotten test logs of captured Allied vehicles, including that one Sherman tank. Each report was written in neat German handwriting, signed by multiple engineers. The tone was almost reverent, not mocking. One entry stood out. Sherman M4A2, tested for 72 consecutive hours under varied terrain. Engine never stalled. Transmission endured full stress rotation. Only minor overheating over excessive conditions. Unprecedented reliability. At the bottom of the page, someone had drawn a small American star. Next to it, in pencil, were 3 words: practical, predictable, human. In the weeks that followed, Allied researchers realized that these German evaluations were among the most objective records of the Sherman ever written. The Wehrmacht had spent more time testing it than many American crews had spent driving one in combat. Colonel Edward Halley, a U.S. Army historian who read the documents, later said, "They were engineers first, soldiers second. What they wrote was honest. They admired the enemy's work, even if it meant admitting defeat." But there was something odd in the reports. A section labeled "Performance Under Extended Stress" described a test that was never officially logged. It mentioned that the Sherman had been driven continuously for over 1,000 kilometers across rough terrain without a single part replaced. The test location was simply marked Sector 12, a remote site with no coordinates. When Allied investigators searched for Sector 12, they found nothing. No records, no maps, no signs of testing. The area had been bombed and buried under rubble. And yet, among the files, there was a photograph, a black-and-white image of 4 German engineers standing beside the Sherman, covered in mud, grinning proudly, like farmers beside a harvest machine. The back of the photo bore a single caption in German: "She never let us down." No one knows who those men were. Their names were never recorded in the official paperwork. Some believe they were the same group under Kruger, the men who refused to destroy the tank when ordered. The mystery only deepened when a local villager claimed years later that a Sherman tank was hidden in the forest near Kummersdorf. He said he saw it once, covered in moss, untouched, with wildflowers growing through the tracks. When researchers searched the area in the 1960s, they found nothing, just fragments of steel, a few bolts, and a piece of faded olive paint, too small to prove anything. But for those who studied the Kummersdorf documents, the story meant something more than just engineering admiration. It symbolized respect, one enemy quietly acknowledging another's humanity through the language of machines. In the final pages of the secret file, Kruger's handwriting reappears, one last note, dated April 9, 1945. If this war had been fought by mechanics instead of generals, perhaps none of us would need to test engines built to kill. And then silence. That's where the file ends, abruptly, like the story itself. Even now, historians can't agree on what happened to that Sherman or the men who tested it. Some say it was scrapped for metal. Others believe it still lies buried beneath the forests of Brandenburg, sealed away like a relic of 2 enemies who, for a moment, understood each other. It wasn't about who built the best machine, but who built the one that never stopped trying.
In 1992, 50 years after the war, a group of local historians and metal detector enthusiasts went exploring the old Kummersdorf Proving Grounds, a forgotten German testing site swallowed by the forest. Among them was a young mechanic named Marcus Lehner. He had grown up hearing his grandfather talk about a mysterious American tank buried near the testing field, but he always thought it was just a story. That changed when his metal detector gave a strong, steady tone. Digging carefully, They uncovered a curved plate of armor, olive green under the mud. When Marcus brushed the dirt away, he froze. A faint white star appeared on the steel. It was American. Authorities and archaeologists were called in, and over the next few weeks, they unearthed a complete M4A2 Sherman tank, perfectly sealed underground. It matched one listed in the Lost Wartime records, Sector 12 test vehicle. Inside were rusted tools, a torn map, and a small German field notebook wrapped in oilcloth. Most pages were ruined by time, but one message remained clear. The engine has not failed us once. When fuel runs out, we bury her, not destroy her. She belongs to no one now. She is a witness. E. Kruger. The note intrigued Marcus. Who was Kruger? No records existed, no military files, no family, nothing. Years of searching led Marcus to a forgotten archive in Potsdam, where he found one last clue. An unsent letter from Kruger dated 1946. We learned more from your machines than from our own masters. I hope one day Germans and Americans will build things together, not to destroy, but to endure. The letter ended with a haunting line. If you ever find the tank, listen to the sound it makes when you start it. That sound is not of war, but of survival. Years later, Marcus helped restore that same Sherman. When its engine finally coughed to life, the sound filled the workshop. Soft, steady, alive. The same hum that once carried soldiers through Europe now whispered across decades. Today, the tank sits in a small museum outside Berlin. Its plaque reads, "Captured, tested, respected, remembered." And beside it, under glass, is Kruger's final diary entry. The tank that never failed. The enemy that never hated. The machine that outlived us all. In the end, it wasn't about power or victory. It was about respect. A shared understanding between men who built machines not for hate, but for endurance. And if you listen closely, even now, you can still hear it. The quiet heartbeat of steel, still alive, beneath the weight of history.